Hey everyone, I know you're going to love today's episode. I have a conversation with Michael Fenchel, who is a social entrepreneur and facilitator. He started 4 successful companies, including Breathe for Change. And this is where I met him with Breathe for Change, which is a movement enhancing the well-being of over 5 million teachers, students, and school community members. Breatheforchange.com. You're going to love this organization. He's passionate about conscious leadership. He's also the co-founder of PRDX, which is a community of founders co-creating belonging and flow. And Michael lives in Austin with his partner, Adriana, where you'll find him freestyling, meditating, and exploring consciousness with his friends. You're really going to love Michael. And what we talk about in today's episode and what you're going to learn is the importance of mindful leadership, regardless of whether you're a formal leader or not. How to create lasting change from the inside out by following your deep calling and your mission. You know, I love talking about this. The importance of mindfulness strategies in your daily life and specific ways to get into the flow state. So Michael has a lot of expertise around the flow state and brain activity and neuroscience, and he's going to speak to the flow cycle and the 4 stages of brain activity, the secrets to a powerful meditation practice. He's taught thousands of people to meditate and has some really good insights there. The importance of regulating your nervous system, and how collective well-being and individual wellness is important to the future of education. And then finally, how nature-based wisdom and following the flow of life helps you create lasting impact. Enjoy the show, guys. Thanks. All right, I'm really excited today to be here with Michael Fenchel. Michael, thanks so much for coming on with us.
Absolutely, David. Thanks. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's so awesome. We were just sharing before I record that Michael's one of the people that before I even knew him, I had reached out to him via LinkedIn. I was like, you have to be on the podcast. Like everything you talk about is what I want the podcast to be about. So super excited to have you today and would love to just kind of jump in and ask you, what do you think about when people ask you, like, what is this mindful leadership thing? And what is it, what does it mean or how do you define it?
Well, yeah, definitely loving all the overlap that we have too, David. That's something that I've noticed too. And, honestly, I think my definition of mindful leadership keeps evolving. So I don't know that I have like a neat and tidy answer for you, but to me, like what it means is being aware of and conscious of how we're leading, the impact we're having, of course, being aware, like having intention in what we're doing, but also, aligning our intentions with the impact we're having and really understanding not only from an output of what's the ultimate impact we're having on the world or on our customers or on the student base that we're serving, but also what's the impact of the people that we're working with day to day. How are we relating to people? So I think about it through the lens of the Breathe for Change framework, which I co-created, but is this idea of self, relationships, and community. So am I being mindful of how I'm being with myself? Am I aware of how my own well-being? Am I aware of I'm relating to myself? Am I aligned with who I want to be? Then being mindful in my relationships and then in the broader community as well.
Yeah, I put that, people ask me to define it and I'm always like, okay, how am I going to define it? So I was really curious how you're going to answer it. And I keep wanting to like simplify it as much as possible. I love your answer. It's like very simplified, but sometimes I'll say to people, mindful leadership is literally knowing at each moment, whether you're in expansion or contraction. Right. And they're like, what does that mean? And I'm like, okay. So to your point, like you're mindful of yourself, you're mindful of your community, you're mindful of others, but really it starts within yourself, right? Like, am I expanding right now? Like right now we're talking, I feel very expansive, right? Like your energy is very expansive, but there's times throughout the day where I don't feel that way. Right?
Oh, for sure.
I'm like, I'm contracting a lot right now. So then I ask myself, okay, what's going on? And I feel like as leaders, like the leader's in a bad mood or someone's in the room or whoever's leading or they have so much responsibility for not behaving immaturely and being unaware. So I think that's a core element for me.
Actually, I love that you brought those two words up, because if I were to try to do like a succinct definition, I think I would say awareness and responsibility of both our intention and our impact. It's like, are we aware of what's happening? Are we aware of what we're wanting to have happen? And then are we responsible for actually having, the impact that we want to have? So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. And this podcast is really for what I'm calling education changemakers, people that are really interested in seeing change in education. And I feel like the essence for me of the podcast is really about you can create change on the outside without doing the work on yourself. But the real like lasting impactful change is when you actually really like look within yourself and create the change. So for you, what is important about, people listening that are education change makers, leaders? And I like to like define the term leader as very broad. It's not the CEO. It could be anybody who's influencing change in their space. So so many people get turned off by like leader, but
Yeah,
when I say
100%.
education change maker, it's like whatever you're doing to create change in with your context. But for you, like, why is it important for people to be mindful and have mindful leadership as part of their process?
Well, I love that. First of all, like making sure to be inclusive with the concept of leadership, because I think what we need in this day and age is collective leadership. I don't think one person can lead effectively.
Right.
I think we all need to really proactively, make the best out of the situations we're in, which I think of as leadership. So anyway, yes to that. I can answer that question on two levels. Why I believe it's so important for us, for those of us who take on a leadership role, to be mindful. One is on a personal level. For myself, I failed early on in my entrepreneurial career a lot. And I recognize now that it's because I wasn't being mindful of my leadership. I was passionate and I was doing things for the right reasons, but I just wasn't aware of how I was showing up. I would get frustrated when things wouldn't work the way ultimately I was seeking validation, and I was not as aware of the parts of myself that weren't aligned and they were sabotaging me and all that. Right. So, but when I shifted to actually bringing my focus inward and every day asking myself, how can I show up as the human being that I want to be, regardless of, what happens in the external world? Yeah. I actually, there were 3 projects I was working on at the time that all turned into startups or mission-driven orgs that are still around and growing. Right. So there was like a really clear line in the sand for me. Once I picked up the mantle of mindful leadership, things started going really well. So I don't really know how to explain why that is. That's just been my experience. So that's like the personal layer. Then as far as the, considering why mindful leadership is so important, I mean, it's exactly what you said. I think that unfortunately our world is full of people who probably have the best intentions, but are so focused on creating change in the world around them that they don't even realize the impact that they're having. And I think it ultimately limits and sabotages the change that can be created because, for any number of reasons. But if there's not like a coherence between who we are as leaders and what we stand for in the world, then ultimately, even if in the short term that we can inspire people to like join the mission or do things, like in the long term, there's going to be a dissonance, and that dissonance starts to undermine the integrity of the movement or the organization that is, trying to create the change. Yeah, no, I love that. And now I'm curious around for you, when you kind of started to become more mindful, and you said you were starting these companies and you failed, and is there a story? I mean, there is a story there. What's the story there? Like, yeah. Well, the core of the story is that when I was 25, my dad passed away suddenly from a heart attack. And before that, I just didn't really understand that life is short and precious. And after that, it was like an intense experience that was really sad. But there was something about just facing mortality and just facing the like preciousness of the time that we get that had me choose. And I remember really consciously like choosing, like, because I had been learning, I'd been learning yoga, I'd been meditating some, I'd been reading a lot, everything from, philosophy to different, spiritual texts to whatever else. And I knew what I believed. I believed that change has to start from within, Gandhi being one of the many who have revealed that and lived that as examples. So I knew that, but I was caught up in the world that we live in. I was still, even though I knew that, like on my day to day, I was still making decisions that were, trying to chase the thing that seemed most shiny or, shortcut. If there was actually like a hard path to success, but there was a shortcut that might get there faster, I would take the shortcut, even if deep down, I knew that it was better to do the hard path. And that's what I shifted when my dad, for whatever reason, when my dad passed away. And I also went through a really big heartbreak at the time. So I was kind of like, also like, there's not a lot left to lose. I don't know. I felt like there wasn't a lot left to lose. There's a longer story there, obviously, but short story is in that space, I just, yeah, I decided to give it a shot, to experiment and say, like, well, maybe there's a better way to do this. Maybe it's not just about, chasing the shiny object or trying to create as much change as fast as I can in the world. Maybe it's about, maybe there's a path of choosing to do the right thing in every moment and trust that over time doing that will lead me to where I want to be. And that's where, that's where I did start to experience quite a bit more success. And at first I was like pinching myself. I was like, is this actually working?
Right.
There was like a phase of being like, wow, that just happened. That just happened. Like, how is this actually, working? And I'd catch myself like wanting to go back into the old mindset because there's so much, fake it till you make it, like
Yes.
whatever. There's so much pressure and influence in the world to kind of go with the grain or do the status quo, especially in all over the place, but especially in business, like that it took time. But over time, I've thankfully cultivated, I'm very deeply understand and believe that when we really do that work internally, it translates into the type of external creation and success that we want to experience.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. And I feel like when I almost asked, like, is there a story? And of course there's a story, and it's an awesome story. And I feel like one of my favorite lines is, the breakdown leads to the breakthrough. And I feel like that's an example there for you around. And I also love what you said about, I'm a paradigm shifter. So I love to think about the paradigms that need to shift and what are the lies we've been told and the things that we kind of become the default. Like we got to turn that upside down. And I know you are too. That's why I love you.
Oh yeah.
But,
Thanks.
The whole belief that the grind and all this stuff, and like you said, especially in business, it's like, here's the formula. And what I have found is that when you really figure out your own authenticity, like your true authenticity that comes deep from within your soul, right? Like that authentic part of yourself, it doesn't matter what the formula is, or, there's an execution pathway, there's different people. But when you start to really do the inner work, then it's like things start to unfold for you more organically. And
100%.
I know you believe that too, because I really want to hear about your experience with nature. I can't remember how you worded it, but like nature and wisdom. And I want to hear all about that because that's like a big part of what I believe too.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, and also I just wanted to say, because I think what you brought up is really important. I think that all of this business skill set and strategy and entrepreneurial advice out there, it's important, right? Like it's not only being authentic, there's also skills and all that, but and I know you agree with this, but it's just which is the why and which is the core and which is the tools, right? Like connecting to the core of a mission and living it every day, and then seeking out the other people and the skills that we need to accomplish our mission is really important, but not in a way that pulls us away from that deeper why or that deeper core of how we're doing it. So just wanted to name that because I think it's super important. I love that you brought that forward. And I find that people get caught in like an either or mentality about that a lot, where it's like, either I'm going to live my authentic life and just kind of forsake the world of business almost, or just say through it to the whole world of business, or people are in the world of business trying to create tangible things, but lose track, or maybe never were super in touch with the really deep, layer of connection and to something deeper or greater or whatever the right word is. And so I think where those come together is where the sweet spot is.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And I know I'd asked you another question, but I want to talk about this for a little bit longer.
Yeah,
so
let's do it.
So really, I feel like what you're saying is, because there's this kind of line of just be really authentic and just screw the formulas. And I'm like, okay, I know a lot of people that try that and don't actually succeed on the outside. Yep. So they might have a really peaceful life and a great life and things are going well. But when it comes to actually succeeding in the external world, there's this integration that happens, right? And I feel like what you're saying is work from the inside out and not the outside in, right? Because we go on social media and we're like, oh, okay, if I follow Joe Schmo, I'll make $1 million in 69 days or whatever.
Right. Yeah. Which probably not, but
and you're like, well, I don't really believe that. But you're like, but if I follow that formula, I'll get it. And then there's a part of you and within you that's okay, we know that's not how it works. What is coming through you from in an authentic way. Then you find that why, you find that authenticity. And then you're like, okay, now I need a structure to launch Breathe for Change or to create my school or whatever it is that we're trying to create on the outside world, right? And I feel like that's such an important nuance. I'm really glad you brought it up.
Thank you. Yeah. I get to coach a lot of entrepreneurs. One of the organizations I started, or movements I started, is an incubator, but it's a very unique, it's the largest co-working space in Wisconsin. Now I'm from Madison, Wisconsin originally, but
Okay.
it's like got a very unique flavor towards helping people who want to have a positive impact or do good in the world, like helping them succeed entrepreneurially. But so, and also, anyway, without going all into it, I spend a lot of time supporting other entrepreneurs. And so I really feel like there's this really potent, successful place where we're most connected, like we're deeply connected to why we're doing what we're doing, who we want to be in it. And we don't get pulled out of that center of that. And at the same time, we embrace the strategies and all the technologies and the tools that work, and don't reject them just because maybe they weren't designed from like, some deep place of connection, but that's okay. As long as as long as we hold that, then I think we can leverage, the things that work in the world of business. So yeah, it's an area I spend a lot of time thinking about, because I think it's a dilemma that many people face who want to create change. It's like how much to work within the systems that are here, even if we don't necessarily believe with a lot of their underpinnings, versus to step outside of them. And I think there's a path for everyone, but for me, my path is to have kind of one foot in both worlds, like be outside, not be fully in the system, but also really, leverage it to create positive change in this, in the society that we're in.
Yeah. And I would say for years, I was much more in the like buck the system and like screw the system, but that was really just my angry inner child. So as I've worked through that healing and really doing that shadow work, like I now understand that you can do both. Like you can create something on the side, and you can also kind of disrupt a system, and they have to work like as an ecosystem together.
I love that. Well, it's actually a good segue to your other question, because
yeah,
part of the way that I learned, like the body of wisdom that I've learned the most from is actually are a few different indigenous like lineages of from the Navajo and different descendants of the Mayan and Quero peoples. But so when I was about 20, I got introduced to this wisdom keeper who is in Wisconsin, who I would go out and spend like a weekend on her land, just learning from her every, I don't know, a few times, 4 or 5 times a year, maybe. I mean, she's amazing, and I got really connected, but to her and to the practices. But mostly what I was all about is to spend time in nature, and, I'd be meditating or I'd be reflecting, but a lot of it was to be like, how does the natural world work? How do things relate to one another? What's the rhythm of it? Like, what's the pace of it? Like, what's the feeling like? Because in nature, everything is authentic. Nothing is pretending to be what it's not, unless it's like on very rare cases, like a hunting strategy or something. But basically, like, nothing is, as far as we know, like censoring themselves or being like, should I be myself or not? It's like, no, everything is being itself. So there's something amazing in that. And also growth in nature is really beautiful too, to me, because it's like a harmonious growth. There's not like, it's like growth over time. And it's like, by definition, I think like sustainable growth, which is, I think, something to aspire to. So anyway, there was lots of, so many lessons I learned through that actually informed a lot of, the story I shared about after my dad passed away. Like that was a large part of the wisdom that I really hadn't been living fully in my entrepreneurial pursuits, that I did live more since then, and still do now. I actually have another wisdom keeper in New Mexico that I regularly see, but go on vision quests, like so be out in the desert for 6 days and nights by myself type of thing, and like really get clear on what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. So that's a little bit about how nature like nature and nature-based wisdom practices have supported me in the journey.
I really love that. And one of the things I like to talk about a lot is whatever you believe in terms of like your religion, your spirituality, like that gets messy, right? In
Totally.
in the human form, like real messy, and like wars and deaths. But I always just say, like, do you believe in life, and do you feel the flow of life? And like, I always joke, I'm like, does the leaf say like, okay, I need a project manager to decide when I'm going to fall from the tree, right? Like, it's just like, does the river like say like, okay, I'm not going to flow that way until I get, permission from the leader or whatever. Right. So I really am a believer in just like, can you connect with the flow of life? And I'm actually not one of those guys who's like super into nature, or, like a mountain person or a hiker. And my wife's annoyed because she's much more of an outdoors person. And she's like, you just want to play basketball this time. Do you ever want to like go into the mountains? And I was like, sure, they're beautiful. But, but as I've gotten more connected with the flow of life, it's like, oh gosh, I get what people really feel when they go out into these, spacious mountains and when they're out in the wilderness, because it's literally, like you said, it's just the organic, harmonious flow of life. And my goal in life is like, can I live that way on a moment by moment, day to day basis? Like, can I just live in the flow of life and not interrupt life with the stories of the mind, or my past or future projections? Just like, just be right here, right now, just in the flow of life. And I feel like that's really cool that you got to go and do like 6 days in nature, because that's how you live that way, right? Is you just connect in that way so deeply.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I've done it 3 times now. I'm doing it once a year, at least for 4 years, which is like part of the tradition of what the lineage that I'm studying. But yeah, I mean, I first of all, teach their own. I don't think it's like all of us have our own ways of connecting with that flow of life. And I love that you're bringing that up. I definitely don't think that like going on a vision quest is for everyone. And certainly wouldn't like, put it out that way either. Vision quest in particular is a very sacred, rite of passage. But I think that whether it's nature or any other activities that are, helping us connect with something greater than ourselves. And again, it doesn't have to be like it can be whatever that means. That means that can be, the living universe we're in. It can be Earth. It can be just a community, whatever that is. I think having time to get beyond ourselves intentionally and really be connected to that feeling that can arise in us. And actually, I study flow states a lot. The other thing I do lately is coach entrepreneurs and teams in flow and belonging. And so there's so much amazing neuroscience around flow also. And it's like flow is an awesome subject because there's incredible research and science to back up the state of our nervous system. Like flow is essentially like the optimal functioning of our nervous system. And it's an evolutionary state that we can access. And it helps us get outside of our limited perspective and really feel like we're merging with something that's beyond ourselves. And it's like cross-cultural. It's found in all different societies. Like, so it's absolutely like a real biological, neuroscientifically backed phenomenon that most humans, if not all, have experienced at one time or another. And so I think it's a really cool place to go, because it's something that is we're all inherently capable of, or at least almost all. And it's like, it does have this sense of, purpose and a sense of real meaning in it. So I love that you bring that up. And I think for me, I find that a lot in nature, and some people find it playing sports, which is another place where it's really, or making music, or connecting with friends, or whatever it might be. And I think the key is to be aware of be aware of our state. Another definition of mindful leadership is, and I love this is what you said, like, are we expanding or contracting, right? It's like, well, what's our state of being right now? Are we curious, or are we judgmental, or any of the other ways that we can be? Because it's like an invisible lens through which everything that we're experiencing is coming through. And if we can be mindful of that, like, what are the emotions that are present? What are the thoughts? What's the state of being? Then so much of the time, if we're not connecting with someone else, if we're experiencing conflict, if we're frustrated or stuck, simply by shifting our state of being, we shift that conflict or that barrier. And I think that in and of itself can save entrepreneurs and anyone, changemakers, anyone, so much time and increase our effectiveness to be able to create the change that we want to create so much.
Yeah. And this reminds me of a story. So I had a program for a while where we would train leaders on kind of all these things we're talking about. And one of them was a principal, and because I also do like school leader groups. And she's like, "Oh, I want you to come to my school." I was like, "Great." And then we were kind of chatting, like, "What do you want me to do? I haven't done this for a while with teachers." And she was like, "Oh, well, the first week in your program, you just asked us to be aware of our state of being, right? Like, just for 1 week. And when we come back next week, like, tell you how we noticed it and what was different." And she's like, "Can you just do that with them?" And so I met with them last week, and I basically just said, like, can you be aware of whether you're expanding or contracting, and start to bring that awareness? And then to your point, then I was like, what we'll go next time is we'll think about when you feel more expanded, when you feel more open and aware, and, like, the things are going well, more in the flow, then, like, what were you doing and how can you shift that? And so I want to talk to you about this, like, what are some of the things that, because I'm talking to educators here, right? Like, what are some of the things they can do? And I always talk about, well, you're with children a lot of the time. Totally. So if you're not sure how to switch from, like a contracted kind of the mind and the stories and all that, like, just watch like an animal, nature, or go be with a child or a teenager. That doesn't have to be a 5-year-old. Like I used to work in high schools. Like teenagers are amazing, right? They're not fully,
Yeah.
they're fully in flow, right? Most of the time. That's why they drive us crazy as adults, right? Because they're so in flow and the prefrontal cortex isn't fully developed. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Like, what are some of the things that you would tell people in terms of what they could do to kind of shift or be aware or whatever?
Yeah, well, I love everything that you just shared. I think awareness is definitely the foundation. I mean, when it comes to getting into flow state, or to flow, but like that type of state of being, it's well, first of all, I think that some of the most like universally accessible and like effective ways of doing that include the breath. Is
Absolutely.
I mean, we started a company called Breathe for Change.
Breathe for Change.
It's because, but and have even learned. I mean, there continues to be just more and more amazing science and research coming out about how the breath works and how it stimulates the vagus nerve and how it, like, so many different things about it, right? But the breath is, to me, in many ways, the breath is like the bridge between our external world and our internal world. Like we're always bringing air in, we're always letting air go, and then beyond that, it's also like the biggest, most immediate regulator of our nervous system. So to me, like, basic level, right, is taking 3 deep breaths, or 7 deep breaths, whatever it might be. And also posture, right? Physiology, because the different ways that we hold our body have a huge influence on the thoughts that we're having and the emotions that we experience. So to me, it's like noticing, first of all, if for me, frustration and impatience are my, like, I go there, and they're my like enemies.
Like
so
every entrepreneur.
Yeah, I know, right? We all have different ones. For me, it's that I have such a sense of urgency that, like, I just have to consistently practice relaxing, basically. Yes. But for others, it might be different, right? It might be sad. It might be like depression. It might be whatever. But
yeah,
I think noticing, and then, taking a few deep breaths and just finding a posture that feels good. Like for me, and for many people, like open-hearted, and just some deep breaths, and just focusing on the body and how it feels to do that. So breath and physiology are probably the I would say, like, the fundamentals for this. But the other thing that is really valuable, there's something called the flow cycle. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but maybe you have. But there's 4 stages that are of brain activity that we go through every time we enter flow. The first stage, to oversimplify it, the first stage is intention or challenge. So basically, we come across either some challenge that we're facing, or something we want to accomplish, which usually it's both, right? I mean, you can't really have a challenge if there's not something you're trying to do. The second is like when we release and let go. And this is where many people fail to enter flow, because actually, in order to enter, and the third stage is flow. Then the fourth stage is like recovery and integration after flow. And the first stage of intention and challenge is happening mostly in the conscious mind, in the prefrontal cortex, like you mentioned, right? It's like, I really, I have this intention or the goal of my students learning, this math lesson, right? And the challenge is maybe there's, disruptions in the classroom, for example, right? So the natural tendency is to get frustrated, or to like think about it, or to like talk about it. But actually, that second stage of the cycle is about releasing and letting go and actually relaxing, and to get out of the overly thinking and either into the body through some breathing or movement. That's why one of the reasons, many reasons why, mindful movement in the classroom and with students is so valuable. But and then that's actually what supports us in getting into flow. So I think learning about it, there's a great book called The Art of Impossible by Stephen Kotler that really dives in an accessible way, but also really goes into the neuroscience of this. And I think just like having a basic understanding of how we function, how our minds and bodies work, can really help us to identify, like, why am I feeling the way I'm feeling right now, and what can I do to address it?
I love this so much. And I'm like not an expert in any of these things, and I don't want to be. I've always been a generalist. Like, that's why I was really good at leadership, because I never had to be an expert at anything.
Totally.
I could just like oversee everything. But anyway, so I guess that's part of this podcast here, is bringing on people that can speak to this. But I really do want to have more people speaking to the nervous system and the vagus nerve, and a lot of things you mentioned, the breath and that kind of thing, which is great. And we'll keep talking about that throughout this podcast. But I do think all the things you mentioned are really vital. And I always say, just like you've been saying, figure out for yourself what works best for you, right? Yeah. So like, I'm very kinesthetic, right? I told you I play basketball, I'm an athlete. Mm-hmm. So like, I have to get out and like walk and move and do stuff, like I do sitting meditation, but I didn't do it for so long until I was about 40 something, because it was like, well, number one, I had a traumatic childhood. So sitting still and breathing was like very, very traumatizing for me. It was just like, I couldn't sit still and just breathe, right? Because it just felt like my nervous system thought, well, you're going to die. Like, like that's literally how it feels, right? When you're in fight or flight. So it's like sitting still and breathing was like fight or flight for me. So it took me for years, but what helped was just doing a little bit at a time, like a few minutes, and then walking meditation, and then talking to people while I was walking, but making sure that I was aware of where I was operating. Am I operating in a place of expansion or contraction? Because you can talk to people and walk, and it's like super not expansive and not helpful. But yeah, so I always tell people, figure out what works for you. I have a friend who like could not do sitting meditation for years, and now she's a professional artist. And like the paintings she creates, someone just paid like 10 grand for a piece she created, and it's like she couldn't sit and meditate, but if she paints for like 3 days straight, it's like she's massively expanded, right? And so
100%.
you got to figure out what it is for you and what works best for you. And part of that is like knowing yourself and experimenting, right?
100%. Yeah, I think unfortunately meditation often has like a particular image, sort of, I think that's changing now, but anyway, has had like a very specific understanding of like what counts. That's the number one thing. I mean, I've taught meditation to thousands of people. I mean, I've trained thousands of people in how to be meditation teachers. And I think the number one thing is people are like, am I doing it right? And it's like,
right.
It's
the wrong
like,
question.
Yeah. Right. And I get it, because that's how we're educated. Like that's how we've been educated, right? There's a right and a wrong and all that. But it's like the biggest barrier is that thinking that it has to be a certain way. And in truth, when we give our minds space and just pay attention, we're doing it right. And it's going to look very different, because we're all neurologically very different, and obviously on all the levels very different from one another. We're very diverse. So meditation also needs to be as diverse as human beings are.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to kind of transition a little bit around, you started Breathe for Change, co-founded Breathe for Change, and I'm launching this podcast, and the podcast, and I've been doing this work for a long time in education too, around how do we as educators, education change makers, really start to shift the way we're operating in the schools and in the space. And my dream is that as we get more and more educators, I say education change makers, I'm talking about people that really want to create change, not people that are just kind of clocking in, clocking out, and going through the status quo, but people that are like, I'm here to create change. This is a calling for me. Like everything I ever do is a calling. It's not just like, I'm just going to do this. It's like, this is a calling. And, you talk about it as like collective well-being or well-being in schools. And I know that's like center of Breathe for Change. So I just love to hear, what do you think needs to happen in schools, and how do we create this movement so that more and more educators are doing this type of work? And what I believe is then it ripple effects out across the whole entire industry, and especially for the students.
Yeah. I mean, I will say right up front, I definitely don't have the answers as far as like what needs to happen on the whole systemic level. I think there's a lot that needs to happen, but I love the question. I just want to say right up front, like I've never been in the classroom. I taught Spanish after school, but my experiences with is like working with adults, training, educating adults who, and supporting many expert educators, working alongside many expert educators. So I definitely, just to name, like, don't have, like I said, I don't feel like an expert at all as far as like what school needs to look, or what I think school needs to look like. But what I do know for sure is that, and we use the word collective well-being a lot, because I think that, first of all, I know for sure that wellness, mental, physical, emotional wellness is incredibly important and is the foundation for everything, including academic learning. So that's, and it is making its way into schools, it seems, but it is still so under emphasized. And also, unfortunately, educators are so often not in their own best state of well-being that it's very hard. Wellness is something that, like, you need to be well to be able to really teach wellness in a meaningful way, because students will learn more what they see than what they hear, right? They're gonna, if the teacher's up front, what they feel is right. If the teacher's doing their best, if the teacher's underpaid, overworked, super stressed out, and frustrated with something about the administration or whatever, and they get a lesson plan on, compassion, and they're trying to teach kids how to be compassionate when inside they're feeling incredibly frustrated and stressed, it's not going to land. It's not really rocket science. And it's not that educator's fault per se. It's just not going to work, right? So we need to first and foremost, and this is what Breathe for Change is all about, but we need to equip educators. We need to support educators in in experiencing well-being so that they can effectively teach that to kids. Mental health obviously is huge. There's such a crisis going on, and it's only getting worse. And that's with adults and students. But if we don't have adults who are able to resource themselves and have the support they need and the skills they need, then it's very hard to get that to the students. And then the other thing is, so that's something that we're passionate about. I'm passionate about. Is a very underemphasized part of what's needed in education. And then the other thing that really comes to mind for me is this idea of collective well-being, because we human beings are very interconnected. Like when we all know this on an unconscious level. We can walk into a room where there's like incredible frustration, or like you can walk into a room and like feel the tension, and you're like, you want to like back out of the room because it's like, dang, there's something going on here under the surface, right? Or you can walk into a different setting, whether it's some close friends who are having a great time, and you walk in, your nervous system immediately relaxes, because our nervous systems weren't designed they're not isolated. Like, we are social creatures, and our own state of our nervous systems is intimately related to everyone that we're around. So the ways that we interact with one another, the ways that we care for ourselves and care for one another, the ways that we build relationships, the ways that we build community, these all have a huge impact as well. And that's something that I really don't see being I think the adults often aren't educated on, because the science is there. It's been there for a while, but it's not like, it hasn't really proliferated to the point where most people have the language to understand, how we're all really connected and how we're all influencing one another. Even if we understand it on an experiential level, the actual like intellectual and just like the academic side of that is sort of emerging. So I think there's a huge opportunity for classrooms and school communities that are really fostering that type of deep relationship and connection and support around well-being and bringing well-being into that as well, that can have a hugely beneficial impact. So those are some of I went on a little rant there because I'm really passionate about this, but
no, it's fine.
Those are some of the things that, I feel like really would like to see more of, and I'm actively working on seeing more of in education.
That's what I love. And I really appreciate you starting by saying, like, I'm not the expert educator in the classroom, because I think I mentioned this to you when we were talking about something else about when we were meeting, and I was saying, like, the thing educators hate the most is when people that have never walked in a classroom are like spouting out all the solutions. And I will ask people sometimes in my previous podcasts that weren't educators, and like they'd start spouting out different things, and I'm like, you're probably right, but no one's going to listen to you because of the fact that we don't want to be lectured at, and like there's always the business guy can come in and save education. So appreciate that, and I think my listeners will too. That said, everything you said after that really resonates, and I think people will agree that like bringing, and this is really a big part of this podcast, is really starting to have a platform and a place for people to speak about this and say, like, let's bring this into as many schools as possible. And obviously the work you're doing with Breathe for Change is amazing in that respect too. Okay, there's one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. And this is a big question, but I know you can handle it. So
bring it on.
What do you kind of see, again, not as the educator who's been in a classroom his whole life, but like as someone who works in education now, what do you see as how education is going to change over the next, like, let's say 20 years?
Well, how I hope and believe that education is going to change is, I believe that we will give a lot more emphasis on, first of all, on wellness and well-being, and actually make space in the day for it, and educate on mind and body, mental and physical and emotional well-being, and support educators in that as well. So that's one aspect. But beyond that, I really would like to see education being more and more able to meet each teacher, like, first of all, empowering educators more as well, because I think that I think trying to fit students into cookie cutters and educators into cookie cutters is a recipe for disaster. I think And I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of cases. And
Yeah.
as important as standards are, and I do think they are, I think that it's even more important, or at least equally important, to have very skilled educators who are very well trained and supported and developed, and also really trust, let them help them use their skill and experience to actually have the biggest impact with students. And also, I'm really into more learner driven models. And I mean, there's so much innovation that's happening that, again,
Yes.
I don't feel like I can speak expertly at all to, what exact form. I think that for different students, different forms of education are needed. And I think my overall sense and hope and feeling, and what I'm part of and want to continue to be part of, is helping there be many more opportunities in education for students to find the type of education that works for them, for teachers to really educate from a place that they believe in and that they're skilled in, and
Yes.
for that to be the experience of many more people. And I think the other thing is that, I'm an entrepreneur. My father was an entrepreneur. So thankfully that door was, I didn't even know I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but I just didn't want to be anything else. So I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. Right. But I think also, as we haven't talked about, but most people are aware of, our job market is dramatically shifting.
Oh yeah.
So we need to I hope and imagine we're going to get away from rote memorization and a lot of the things that are just completely essentially useless, and really move towards helping people find who they are, helping students find who they are at their core, what their gifts are, who they want to be, how they want to contribute to society in a meaningful way that works for them and society. To me, that's where a lot of the magic is, in addition to, the skills for well-being to navigate this very stressful world. I also really hope and believe that education needs to focus on that, helping students tap into something they care about, something that matches their skills and gifts and talents, whatever those may be. And that's going to look so different for different students. And also have a mindset that they can adapt to change, because change is only accelerating. And, we really need to cultivate that skill.
Yeah, no, I mean, we could really talk about this for a long time, right?
Yeah.
There's so much to talk about. But what I love what you said is all things I believe in, why I launched Growth Public Schools, why I'm doing this podcast, because really it's about how do we create more learner driven? My belief is that we can create more learner driven schools and proof points that people start to see that this is possible. And so, when I was kind of trying to figure out the real thesis statement for this podcast, I was getting a little confused with myself, because I'm I want it to be all about well-being for educators, so that creates a ripple effect. And I want people to see that these learner-driven schools can totally, change the world. So it's a little bit of doing that dance in the conversations we're having. But if we could have the places that show that you don't have to do the traditional way of school, because we don't know. And when I was recruiting families to my school, a lot of people were like, well, no one's going to want that. And I'm like, well, no, they want it. They just don't know what it is. So my pitch would be is your child happy in school right now? Not really. Is your child being challenged? Not really. Does every adult in the building know what your child's calling is and what they're working toward, including the child? Not even remotely close. Do you want a school where that would be possible? Yes. And it's yes. So people don't understand what it is, but necessarily they don't know what the structure looks like and what it looks like, but they know what it feels like to have their child cared for, to have a place where the kids are at the center and there's an entrepreneurial mindset. And to your point, 20 years from now, I mean, you think about 20 years ago, all the democratization of content and just, everything, it's just going to be its own, AI, we could go on and on, right? So creating schools that are actually, not 100 years behind, but 100 years ahead. And so it's a big task, but it's great to meet people like you that are at least having the conversations and, having Breathe for Change, because again, I do believe this is where, when I get confused on what this podcast is about, I'm oh no, now remember, it's the intersection of people that are working in the space that want to create change, that are doing the inner work, that are saying I'm ready to learn about the flow state and the nervous system and my own inner child and all these things that are going to help them be a better leader. And that's where you start to see the ripple effect, and you start to see more and more of these learner-centered schools open across the country, and people like you and me get to talk about it and share it with others. So that's the hope.
Same team there. Yeah, let's do it.
On that note, anything you want to share with the listeners, about Breathe for Change or the website or anything like that, you might want to do it. We'll put it in the show notes, but just in case you want to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I mean, check out, if you're in education and you're passionate about well-being, check out Breathe for Change. We were started, my co-founder, Dr. Ilana Nankin, who was a classroom teacher. She is the actual educator. I brought the entrepreneurial side and just the passion for this stuff and wellness. And my background is actually in physics. So kind of the mind body wellness side. But anyway, started it in 2015 and have now just certified our 10,000th educator as a certified 200-hour yoga instructor. And we have the world's only yoga teacher certification that's all about how it's incredibly relevant to education, both for your own well-being and purpose and passion and staying connected to that thing that drove us to education in the first place, which can be very hard to stay connected to these days. And then also, of course, tons of tangible tools and strategies to work with kids and adults of different ages. So that's a little plug, but yeah, would love, we run trainings, all the time. So there's a lot of free resources and webinars and stuff. So just encourage people to check it out. Really proud of it. We've created, a lot of amazing experiences. And most importantly, our community is super robust and there's passionate educators that are, really changing the world. So it's a place to get inspired as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah, no, definitely. That's how I met you, was through Breathe for Change. Is it breatheforchange.com?
Yeah.
Breathe with the number 4?
FOR.
Oh, FR, breatheforchange.com. Okay, great. It'll be in the show notes, but just in case, check it out. And it's just been a pleasure talking with you. And I feel like we could talk for hours, but hey, we did a good job.
Another time. Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Thanks, David.